For this first piece, we're going to be talking about Al Gore's statements on President Trump's State of the Union. He states here on February 5th, the president doesn't get it. Solar and wind represent the fastest growing job sectors. Costs of renewable energy are declining rapidly. There is global sustainability revolution happening. He's boasting about more dirty and outdated oil and natural gas products. Hashtag State of the Union. Now, the fact is what he's talking about, the declining costs. That means subsidies from the government. They're not actually declining. They're actually just being subsidized itself. If you look at actually the taxation, when you file for your taxes, you're going to see there's massive amount of subsidies to cover these. It's not actually the costs that are actually declining, but actually more subsidies have been added to actually cover for the costs. The costs have not declined one bit. They're still highly costly. Now let's look at what actually these so-called dirty energies are actually adding. The major problem that they've argued is carbon. Look right here is study this is from 2013. This is a piece from Climate Central out of London, from Tim Bradford from the Climate News Network. Study finds plant growth surges as CO2 levels rise. This would assume that the basic idea that as CO2 levels rise, plant growth continues, and this is actually what is noticed in general areas and especially noticed in rainforests. That basically as CO2 level, you'll notice high levels of CO2 in rainforests, and then in barren areas you'll notice low levels of CO2. This is because of a factor that CO2 is causing this massive growth. And it's not and this disproves the idea that carbon is an actual pollutant. Now, where we need to view problems of actual pollution is not from the actual fossil fuels that we're consuming, because fossil fuels will continue because they actually come from actual dead plant and animal life that gets compressed and actually formed into these fossil fuels, because not everything that dies becomes an actual fossil itself. A lot of it just becomes compressed and actually formed into such things as coal, natural gas, and natural gas really comes from stuff below swamps, and then you find in the case of other stuff is it can actually form into oil itself, in the petroleum. Now, when you look at let's look at the two specific types that he actually that Al Gore cited himself. Let's go first, solar. The dark side of solar panels. Basically, we're talking that mercury and chromium are problem makers. Basically, these can essentially lead to pollution into the actual ground and actual water itself, and actually leak into oceans, which is another problem as well, beyond the actual problems of actual into the air. As you might see from some factories, this can actually be even more troubling. So when they're talking about how great solar panels are, they actually contribute to more pollution than they're supposedly saving. Because of the actual makeup of the actual panels themselves, because the fact is they have to be repaired, and when these parts are removed, they eventually start to decompose themselves, and they're leaking in these materials, and they're horrible. And they're also made of a lot of different glues and pieces that are actually very, very toxic. And when we see these things, they're basically leading into a lot of different problems for people. And it doesn't matter if you're installing them on your roof or if you're installing them in a big solar panel farm. These things are causing massive problems. And when solar panel farms go bust, these things, there is no legislation to essentially regulate them to remove them, and at a cost from the EPA like there is at where the actual initial owner had to remove them to eliminate problems such as you would if you owned a gas station in that exact same spot, or a drilling operation for oil, as the EPA would require. And the problem being is you can just leave it there if your company went bust, and that causes huge amounts of issues with when you're talking about pollution. And what we're talking about here is basically if we're trying to get rid of actual legitimate scientifically proven pollution, we should essentially be going away from solar panels. Solar panels, number one, the energy cannot be stored. It's basically no different than what you can basically store in one short period, because if you don't use it, it essentially gets dissipated. And this is the whole problem. And this is from Tree Hugger, which I can guarantee you is not exactly going to be a anti-global warming site. That's going to be kind of one of these highly liberal sites. So they're not exactly going to be from a very, very conservative anti-global warming type of site when we're looking at that. Now let's look at the idea of wind turbines. This comes from Autobahn, actually looking out for the actual birds themselves. And what we have is turbines kill 140,000 to 328,000 birds in North America every year. And as the more we expand for these wind turbines, it kills more and more each year. And they keep making, you can basically try to scare them away with cameras and radars and GPS and other things like that, and bright blades and bright lights and things like that. But the fact is in the end, you're still going to be killing a lot of birds. And these things are not exactly the prettiest to be looking at to begin with, as you see right here. They take up a lot of space, and each one does not add enough energy to be worth it. But the fact is you're killing a bunch of birds just to do this, and their most of the excuses is, oh, we'll kill a bunch of stray cats to do an offset. What, we're going to kill more animals? This is the excuse of the whole of these left-wing people that want to actually support these green energies. And I don't think killing more animals is the solution to a problem. What we need to be looking at is looking at what actually happens. We know that CO2 is not a problem, so this would show that the actual current energy that what we're using as fossil fuels is not a problem. That means CO2 is not an issue. All it does is basically show that plant levels are fine. The plant levels are actually taking up the CO2, and that plants are actually good. We see that it's basically solar panels, wind turbines, and we even see the same thing with hydroelectric plants, how they basically chew up fish and do the same exact thing. They basically obliterate fish when they do this. And people do not talk about this on the left because they don't want a bad name for these types of green energies. The fact is there's only one true green energy, and that's nuclear. They go, oh, but what about the nuclear waste? Nuclear waste is either A, recycled back into the nuclear system because of the actual high cost of plutonium, or B, it's actually sold to actually hospitals for nuclear medicine, which goes to either A, cure cancer patients, or B, goes into other forms of nuclear medicine, such as testing like HIDA scans, which are used to test for problems in the gallbladder, to other types of scans of internal organs. And this is where it comes from, and where it actually goes. So you're not actually wasting anything, and it basically goes to these two different sources. So when we're talking about this, is it either goes to medicine or it goes to the actual power itself. And these things basically pretty much for a basically a you could take a handful of plutonium and power what it would take a county's full of these air turbines for energy, and it would equal out to the same thing. And that's the whole thing. This is why nuclear energy is a great option, and it is a green energy. It does not exhibit any carbon. It is free of carbon. Basically, all it does is it heats up water. You'd have to basically find an area in which you would basically allow for it to run water vapor and allow it to cool it down. Essentially, creates a hot spring for a specific area. Now, if you can run a specific waterway through it, there would actually be a separate waterway from the actual natural waterway. You could essentially create a perfect system, because all it's doing is heating up that water. That's how it actually creates the energy. It creates it very much like the old steam engines did for locomotives. And when you compare that with what these things do, what all your green energies do, you'll see that basically is they are very inefficient, number one, and number two is they lead to either A, mass amounts of pollution that is actually measured, or B, it kills massive amounts of animals. And I don't think we want either. And if Al Gore is bragging about how great wind and solar is, or he might brag about hydroelectric, but the fact is these things are horrible ideas. And I think we want to come up with an idea that basically benefits people. I don't think we want to be killing animals. We don't want to be killing stray cats because that's inhumane. And we should embrace life, not kill it. Just because we want to essentially try to save some type of a technology that someone's making money on, we try to kill some other type of animal because one type of animal is being killed. You don't do that. You actually say, hey, this technology isn't working. We need to abandon it and find something else that does. You could actually take a large area, put one nuclear plant there. We're not like these socialist and communist countries that are completely backward. We can actually run nuclear plants here without any problems. What's the problem is when you get socialist countries, basically you get people who don't care about the outcome. So they're not even doing their job right. When you get people who actually have passion for their work and get people who are trained correctly, you're going to get a serious environment where people are going to actually be putting out the proper system and actually get energy to the people correctly. Just like any other plant can explode and cause massive problems, nuclear energy is no different. And the fact is when if we do it here, we can actually show that we can actually do it efficiently, and for only having not many nuclear plants across the whole country. You got to understand that France did it for many years, and they tried to convert it over to a green energy system, and it actually messed up their energy system completely. What we need to do is understand that, and understand that what France did for many years without one problem can easily be done in the United States. And that's essentially what we should consider as our backbone. And France actually, by going to these so-called green energies, actually raised their carbon emissions just because they went to green, just because they went to wind and solar. They actually raised their pollution and raised their carbon output because they went to that. Germany did the same exact thing. Germany used to have for their electricity, they used to have nuclear. They went to solar and they went to wind and hydroelectric, and then this is what they have now. They have actually a higher output of carbon because of that. Now, if you actually want a pure green energy, you need to go to nuclear. There is no other option. And the reason why Al Gore doesn't talk about this is because he wouldn't make a damn dime off of it. He's only looking to make money in his pocket. This is basically this whole thing of this climate change thing. It's just basically an energy scam. It's the next new energy scam to basically make a lot of money, because this essentially is an area that they basically can set up with subsidies. Nuclear is never going to be subsidized, and thus is not going to essentially be a big money maker for these people that want a crony scam. And this is where this is why you would never see that, and why they would never, why you're never going to see it. This is why this is pretty much the biggest scam out there. They try to basically make people think the world's going to end. They say everybody has to accept these drastic changes, otherwise the world's going to end. And if they don't, they're part of the problem. And you'll have other people like Bill Nye say, if they don't, they should be arrested. And that's why if they have to say, if they're skeptical of something, they should be arrested. You should really think about a point on the other side, because the fact is, if you can't get your point across by facts, and you need to resort to saying that people need to be arrested for not believing without investigation of your points, then the fact is your whole thing is a whole scam from the beginning. Now, if you like this little point, like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and spread it all around social media to your friends and publicly everywhere else. And I will see you a little bit later today with a report on modern art comparing to classical art. And that is it for right now. Bye, everyone.